bother.
You can also...
So you could put salt in it, I'd agree with that, but I mean, how much?
Well, surely that would only deal with one defect in the wine, not everything.
It's said to balance the flavour.
You could
but
also
only
put
if
some
it's
pepper
not,
in if it
if
wasn't
it's
sort of enough peppery enough.
Or you can, another thing is the glasses, the Riedel people, the people that make the Riedel wine glasses, which are the beautiful glasses that they have the specific glass for each variety of wine.
Right.
They would tell you that if you put an inferior wine into one of their really good Pinot Noir glasses,
With
it makes it
that
taste
funny top on
better.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's I've had that experience where it's definitely tasted better out of a nice glass, but I don't know if it's psychological.
Yeah.
Well, this is said to be more than psychological and said to be applied to reds, whites and reds. Belinda Jackson, Group Marketing Manager with Lawson Dry Hills in Blenheim, kindly joining us. Good afternoon, Belinda.
Good afternoon.
And of course, you have lots of salt available just down the road at Lac Grasmere.
Well, we do, and we even have trains on the track now to actually move said salt. So it's getting very exciting down here now.
Well, that's good.
That is good. Can you explain this to us? It's being sold by media as a way of making a modest wine better. Is that accurate?
It's a fascinating concept. I've got two problems with it. Firstly, the wine expert wouldn't put salt in the wine. Because, when wine experts, I don't like that expression even, but buy wine, you're buying it to actually experience the wine the way that the vineyard and the winemaker has made them. At the end of the day, if you don't like it, that's one thing. But our personal taste doesn't necessarily dictate the quality of something. So I think that, first of all, I'd say wine experts wouldn't do it. And secondly, I'd say that it won't improve the quality, it just changes the balance. You can't improve the quality by adding anything.
It just
But
changes
you
the
can change
taste.
the way it tastes. And if it's more to your liking as a result of doing that, if you've spent your last $5 on a bottle of red wine because you're absolutely desperate for it. Yeah, well, exactly. You're in serious trouble, and not just because of the money, because of the wine. But if you then are devastated at how it tastes and you think that a couple of grains of salt is going to make it better, and it does, then that's fantastic. But it doesn't improve the quality. It merely comes down to personal taste. It's just going to shift the balance of what's in there.
Okay,
and, quality wine is about balance.
All right, but I saw a report on the Wine Stars website today that millennials especially are salting, Chardonnays and Cab Sauves. So what does the salt do to an ordinary sort of wine if a lot of them are thinking it improves it?
Well... If they're preferring the taste with this little tiny, it's not even a pinch, this little bit of salt, as I say, it's altering the balance. Now, wine is a balance of acids and sugar and alcohol and tannins and all of these things. Sugar can ameliorate the acidity. It can have an effect on tannins and soften them. And I think that maybe that's what people are wanting. Perhaps they're talking about wanting a wine that's exceptionally smooth. But then again, I'm not convinced that salt does that. I did actually ask a couple of winemakers. I asked Marcus here down the back there, and he said he's just tried it. He couldn't help himself. He's just tried it. He put horrible with Pinot, a bit more interesting with Sauvignon Blanc.
Okay, all right.
Certainly changes the wine, but not sure it's for the better.
Very good. Belinda Jackson, thank you for joining us. And also thank you to Nikki Bazant and Peter Elliott today. Nice to have your company, both of you.
Yeah, it's been great fun.
And we got through a few topics today, and there'll be a few more tomorrow. Thanks for your company. We're back then and standing by now for Checkpoint with John Campbell.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight on Checkpoint, it's a busy old program, lots happening, and we are looking at length at Donald Trump and this wall. Our correspondents include Rafael Romo, who is the Senior Latin American Affairs Editor of CNN Worldwide. We also speak to Enrique Morones, who is the founder of Border Angels, an organisation based in San Diego, focused on working with people who try and get into the United States illegally. And they tell us the wall will not only hurt Mexico, it will hurt America too. We're looking at that in length. Of course, Citizen Thiel and much more coming up after the Pips and the news at 5 with Katrina.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho.
The Prime Minister denies the American billionaire Peter Thiel bought his way into New Zealand citizenship. The co-founder of PayPal was granted citizenship in 2011, a few months after giving $1 million to the Christchurch Earthquake Relief Fund. The Labour Party says the case raises questions of whether cash was paid in return for citizenship. But Bill English says citizenship can't be bought.
After the earthquake, there was a real need. There was actually a lot of generous donations from around the world. So it's great that he saw fit to make a significant donation. So there's no way it's up for sale.
Bill English says he recalls meeting Mr Thiel at the Beehive once, but citizenship was not discussed. The Mexican president has condemned Donald Trump's order to build a wall along the US-Mexican border and his insistence that Mexico will pay for it. Enrique Peña Nieto says Mexico does not believe in walls and will not be contributing any money. He also says his government will do everything possible to protect the rights of migrants in the United States. The Mexican leader is under growing pressure to cancel a scheduled meeting with Mr Trump in Washington next week. New Zealanders wanting to live in the US may find it more difficult if Mr Trump approves new border rules. According to a draft executive order before the new president, the visa interview waiver program could be suspended. If that happens, any New Zealander trying to obtain or renew either a visitor or work visa would need to undergo an in-person interview, possibly at the US Consulate General in Auckland. Anyone wishing to travel on holiday for fewer than 90 days would be unaffected. Helen Clark is stepping down as the head of the United Nations Development Programme. The 66-year-old former Prime Minister has held the job for 8 years, since quitting New Zealand politics after losing the 2008 election. Our correspondent Nick Harper reports.
Helen Clark's departure from the Development Programme, a post she's held since 2009, will leave a big gap at the United Nations, and the race for her replacement is already on. Former British Foreign Secretary David Miliband, the current head of the International Rescue Committee, and French Ecology Minister Ségolène Royal have already been tipped as Clark's potential successor. Clark is currently the highest-ranking woman at the UN. Nick Harper, RNZ News, New York.
An independent report on the Havelock North water poisoning last August has found there was a delay in letting rest homes know of the problem. A boil water notice was not issued until 6:30 in the evening of the day on which a water sample tested positive for E. coli in the morning. In his report, former Civil Defence Director John Hamilton says rest homes and elderly care facilities were not contacted until the next morning, despite a decision the day before that this should be done. The administrator of Havelock North's Aged Concern, Carol Winters, says the delay was infuriating.
Certainly the feeling of anger was around not being advised early enough. There were many people who were sick, of course, and just kept on hydrating and drinking the very thing that was making them sick.
Carol Withers of Aged Concern. The police say words were spoken before a young man allegedly cut a 72-year-old man's throat in front of his young grandchildren at an Auckland park. They say the man had been picnicking and playing with the children at Little Rangitoto Reserve in Remuera yesterday afternoon. Detective Senior Sergeant Paul Newman says the attacker fled on foot and was last seen running down Upland Road towards Benson Road. He says at least 20 people were in the park at the time.
The young male has engaged the victim in some conversation. I don't want to go into that at this stage, and has tried to draw him away from the park. The male has turned and walked away, and that's when the attacks happened. There's been no argument, there's been no provocation. It was completely unprovoked and a very violent attack.
Paul Newman says the 72-year-old was lucky to have suffered only a minor injury. It's 5:04. To sport, and the former head of the World Anti-Doping Agency, David Howman, says it'd be wrong to tarnish the reputation of champion sprinter Usain Bolt in the wake of a positive drugs test by relay teammate Nesta Carter. Bolt and Carter were part of the Jamaican quartet that won the 4x100 relay at the Beijing Olympics, but a Carter sample from then has been retested and proved positive for a banned substance. All 4 relay runners have been ordered to hand back their gold medals. Hellman says Bolt has been subject to a lot of impromptu and out-of-competition testing.
You've got to be pretty careful here. Usain Bolt is one of those athletes who has obviously been in the limelight for a long time and been tested many, many times. I don't think that someone like him should be put into a position of being said, no, you're subject to being guilty by association. I think that would be a wrong step.
David Howman. Carter is lodging an appeal with the Court of Arbitration for Sport. The first women's semi-final at the Australian Tennis Open between 13th seed Venus Williams and fellow American Coco Vandeweghe has just got underway, and a short time ago they were 4 games all in the first set. This semi will be followed by Serena Williams versus Croatian Mirjana Lucic-Baroni. Southampton have upset Liverpool 1-0 at Anfield to reach the English League Cup football final with a 2-0 aggregate win. And the Wellington rider Joseph Cooper has won the New Zealand Cycle Classic in Wairarapa. That's the news.
Uncertainty in Asia.
There's something very strongly symbolic about the TPP suddenly, with the stroke of one pen, being taken away by the United States.
Americans eye up New Zealand.
They're feeling uncertain about America, and not only America but the whole world at the moment, and I think Trump and Brexit are tangible examples of that.
Bernie Ecclestone's exit.
Formula One needs a benevolent dictator. Better to have one man making the decision than a lot of men not making the decision.
The right formula. Guy and Espiner and Susie Ferguson, Morning Report, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, helping marginalised students to get a fair go in mainstream education. Is improving teacher training the key? And after 10, painter Francis Salol on why he's making 1 million artworks for mental health. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mainly fine, but areas of morning and evening cloud and patchy drizzle south of Waikato tomorrow evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa fine. Horowhenua at Kapiti and Wellington fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine, but rain about the ranges for a time tomorrow. Canterbury mainly fine, but isolated showers south of Christchurch. Buller and Westland, periods of rain easing to a few showers tomorrow afternoon and fine spells increasing. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, rain or showers at times with possible thunderstorms about coastal areas, clearing tomorrow evening. And the Chatham Islands, mainly fine today, a few light showers tomorrow. It's 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thanks, Katrina. Coming up more on Citizen Thiel, the independent report into the Havelock North water poisoning, rebranding Kokoda and salmon farming. And don't forget, if you'd like to watch us, we're broadcasting live on Facebook as well, of course, as Freeview Channel 50. But we begin tonight with Donald Trump, and a day after which there can be no doubt whatsoever that he is changing America and he's changing America's relationship with the world. Beginning today, he said the United States gets back control of its borders. How? Well, first constructing a wall along the US border with Mexico, along with a substantial increase in the number of immigration enforcement officers. Secondly, the beginning of moves that could lead to the deportation of many more undocumented immigrants, including adults who have built their lives in the States after arriving there as children. He's also introducing tough new measures on refugees and immigrants from many Muslim-majority countries. With more on this, to begin our coverage, here's the BBC's James Cook from the Mexican-California border town of Tijuana.
Donald Trump's signature pledge is now one step closer to reality. With the stroke of his pen, the new president ordered the construction of a great wall on the Mexican border. It would begin, he said, within months.
A nation without borders is not a nation. Beginning today, the United States of America gets back control of its borders. We are going to get the bad ones out, the criminals and the drug dealers and gangs and gang members and cartel leaders. The day is over when they can stay in our country and wreak havoc.
Strengthening and extending the existing barrier on this frontier will be hugely expensive. Mr. Trump has always insisted that Mexico will pay, but Mexico says it won't, and the president now admits American taxpayers will have to cough up first.
Ultimately, it'll come out of what's happening with Mexico. We're going to be starting those negotiations relatively soon, and we will be in a form reimbursed by Mexico, which I've always said.
So they'll pay us back?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yes.
So the American taxpayer will pay for the wallet first?
All it is we'll be reimbursed at a later date.
But here in the Mexican border city of Tijuana, business leaders are worried about the impact on trade and skeptical about the president's plans.
The problem is that the majority of Americans are not really familiar with the border. and consequently the idea of a wall seems to be appealing. We already have one. We call it the tortilla curtain. But the truth of the matter is that, I think that's a symbol.
President Trump has always said that he wants to build a much taller, much better, much bigger wall, stretching all the way from here, nearly 2,000 miles, to Texas.
This land is your land. This land is my land.
But even in liberal California, there's backing for President Trump's hard line on immigration, not least from these supporters who call themselves the Trumpettes.
I think it's a good thing. I always say my scripture is Ezekiel 22:30. I sought for a man who would build a wall. And I was reading that the other day, and it just stuck out in my spirit because we need protection. And I pray for America, and I pray that God will shore up the border of our nation.
As well as the wall, President Trump is promising to deport immigrants who commit crimes, to cut funding to states like California, which refuse to arrest most illegal aliens, and to hire 10,000 more enforcement agents. His actions are bold, sweeping, and intensely divisive.
That was the BBC's James Cook on the US-Mexican border. Enrique Morones is the founder of Border Angels, an organisation based in San Diego, focused on migrant rights, immigration reform and preventing deaths along that border. The first person ever to gain dual US and Mexican nationality. He spent decades observing illegal immigration, the people who cross the border and why they do so. And he believes Donald Trump's wall will kill.
Today is one of the saddest days in the history of the United States because of the wall. The more wall, the more deaths. And the people that are trying to come into this country, that are risking their lives through the desert, have no legal way of entering. And that's why they go through the desert, they climb over the wall, they go under the wall. So that wall isn't going to stop people, it's just going to kill people.
Now, perhaps surprisingly, this is measurable. The Mexican-US border is just over 3,000 kilometres long, of course, and part of it is already fenced, walled and protected. This began in 1994 under Bill Clinton, Operation Gatekeeper, it was called. At first, it was designed to control urban areas nearest the border, areas where the drug trade was most obvious, or areas where the most illegal immigrants were passing through. It didn't stop illegal immigration, but it did make it more furtive, more desperate and more deadly. Here's Enrique Morones again.
Before the wall was built, 1 or 2 people would die every month crossing without papers. Since the wall has been built in 1994, 1 or 2 people die every day. Every single day, somebody dies because of that wall, because they cross in real dangerous areas like the desert, for example, or they try to swim through the Pacific Ocean and they drown, or the little boat flips over, they freeze in the mountains. The wall, Operation Gatekeeper, every summer, more people die because of that wall than the entire history of the Berlin Wall. So in the 1980s, President Reagan said, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." And 1994, the United States built its own wall, which covers a third of the 2,000-mile border. Now with Trump, he wants to cover the entire border. That's going to lead to more deaths. And the thing is that 40% of the undocumented people in the country today, they didn't cross through that border. They got a visa. They're from Europe and from Asia. Their visa expired and they stayed. So that wall makes no difference. Had that wall been built completely on 9/10, 9/11 still would have happened the same way. So what Donald Trump is doing is not only unethical and inhumane, it makes absolutely no sense.
So in 1994, when that wall that I think not many people know about began and protected, for want of a better word, border territory not far from where you are, right? San Diego and all around there. People didn't stop trying to get in. They were just more likely to die in the attempt.
That's absolutely right. What they did was they started going around the wall or over the wall. I had a meeting with Senator Ted Kennedy, rest in peace, and he told me, show me a 15-foot wall and I'll show you a 16-foot ladder, because it's not going to stop the people. Right now, that wall that exists right now, it takes 15 or 20 seconds to go over the wall. They just put a ladder next to it. And if Donald Trump builds the wall he wants to build, maybe the ladder will just have to be taller. But the people are still going to go over the wall.
Enrique Morones talking to us earlier. We'll have more on this later with Rafael Romeo, who's Senior Latin American Affairs Editor of CNN Worldwide. The building of the Mexican border wall will mark the start of an immigration crackdown across the United States. President Trump announced plans for new restrictions on refugees and immigrants from many Muslim-majority countries. The plan includes more detention centres, 5,000 more border control agents and 10,000 extra immigration officers. And this is the on-the-record stuff. Draft documents reveal Mr. Trump may also order a review that could lead to bringing back a CIA program for holding terrorism suspects in secret overseas black site prisons where interrogation techniques often condemned as torture were used. Here's Andy Sullivan.
These pictures show the barbed wire surrounding a military site in Poland, where the Central Intelligence Agency is alleged to have once operated a secret prison. These so-called CIA black sites were said to be used to detain, interrogate, and torture terror suspects on foreign soil far from the U.S. Bill of Rights. And they could soon be up and running again. Two U.S. officials telling Reuters President Donald Trump could sign an executive order in the next few days demanding a review of U.S. intelligence needs and whether the CIA should be back in the interrogation business. A draft of the executive order obtained by the Washington Post is titled Detention and Interrogation of Enemy Combatants. Pressed by reporters Wednesday, White House spokesman Sean Spicer denying any knowledge of the document.
I have no idea where it came from, but it is not a White House document.
Is he considering
Kristen, this is a
black sites and
I'm not going to
waterboarding?
start answering hypotheticals about documents that are floating around. That's you're basically... Okay, Kristen, we're going to end this right now.
The CIA launched its covert interrogation program after the September 11, 2001 terror attacks under President George W. Bush.
You bet we're going to detain them. And you bet we're going to question them.
Former inmates allege they were beaten, subjected to waterboarding and other forms of torture in prisons overseas where they were denied contact with the outside world. President Barack Obama shut down the program in 2009. Donald Trump has repeatedly said he wants to bring back waterboarding and other forms of torture.
Torture works, okay, folks? Torture, have these guys. Torture doesn't work. Believe me, it works, okay? But they asked me the question, what do you think of waterboarding? Absolutely fine, but we should go much stronger than waterboarding.
The draft also calls for keeping open the military detention center at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base, which Obama tried unsuccessfully to close throughout his 8 years in office.
That report from Reuters. We will have more on Donald Trump and Washington later in the programme. You're with Checkpoint 5:17. Coming up, who is US billionaire Peter Thiel? The first driverless vehicle is launched in New Zealand. It's got a bit of a twist. And the United Future leader, Peter Dunn, launches a petition to see if you'd like your summer holiday moved to mid-February. Would love your feedback on that and lots of other things. You can contact us on 2101. If you're texting, you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We're on Facebook. In fact, if you're watching us live, hello, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or emailing checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. The furore around a decision to grant citizenship to US tech billionaire Peter Thiel continued today, with the Prime Minister being forced to defend the decision. Mr. Thiel's relationship with the government has been raised before on more than one occasion. In fact, in June 2013, questions from Russell Norman to John Key in the House saw the then Prime Minister reply, and I quote, "I would describe my relationship as cordial. I've met Mr. Thiel on a few occasions." But the issue of the discretionary granting of citizenship has led to Bill English insisting nothing untoward has occurred, and New Zealand citizenship is not up for sale. There does, he said, need to be some flexibility, though, within the legislation. And the high-profile Trump supporter had made a significant financial contribution to the country.
The legislation just says if it's in the public interest, and I don't think there's much doubt that Peter Thiel's contributed to New Zealand. Now, whether that's how that actually fits with the citizenship is a matter for the individual circumstances.
Along those lines, did his $1 million contribution to the Christchurch earthquake have any part in him gaining citizenship?
It's certainly a welcome contribution. I mean, at the time after the earthquake, there was a real need. There was actually a lot of generous donations from around the world, so it's great that he saw fit to make a significant donation. There is discretion in the Act that allows for some decisions by a minister where people have a particular skill or contribution to make to New Zealand. As I understand, there's 200 or 300 of those a year, so there's no way it's up for sale.
What were the special considerations involving Peter Thiel?
Well, look, you'd have to ask the minister and the officials about the detail of the information, but from what I've seen that's publicly available, I mean, he's a philanthropist, investor, That's been good for New Zealand. He was originally given residency in 2006, so I presume that was for the similar reasons that he got citizenship.
Have you ever met Peter Thiel yourself?
I think I may have. I mean, I meet thousands of people, and he's been, he spent time in New Zealand. In fact, I've been checking through, but I don't see any official record, but I think I may have met him.
Bill English, the Prime Minister, speaking earlier today. Nathan Guy, who was of course the Minister who signed off on the discretionary citizenship, he said after advice from officials was unavailable to talk to us today. We think he was involved in a superfast broadband launch in the far north. So who is Peter Thiel? Well, the Silicon Valley German-born billionaire founded online payment site PayPal and the data company Palantir. I'm just looking at it online. They describe themselves as specialising in, and I quote, big data analysis. After Donald Trump won the presidency, Mr. Thiel emerged as one of his key advisors. The New York Times described him as a possible Supreme Court justice and a potential Republican candidate for governor of California. Mr. Thiel has owned property in New Zealand since the mid-2000s and has sunk millions of dollars into New Zealand companies, including Xero, before and after being granted citizenship. However, the Crown-owned venture investment fund says citizenship was not a factor in its $40 million partnership with Mr. Thiel's New Zealand-based investment company. Kate Newton has this report.
Nathan Guy, who was the Internal Affairs Minister at the time Peter Thiel became a New Zealander, has told RNZ that Mr. Thiel was granted citizenship under a provision of the Citizenship Act that states it would be in the public interest due to exceptional circumstances of a humanitarian or other nature, even if the person doesn't meet normal criteria. Auckland lawyer Simon Laurent, who specialises in immigration law, says the exception is very rarely used and he's had little success with it himself.
The sorts of grounds that we have tried to advance for an exceptional circumstances grant of citizenship have included the effective statelessness of someone, say, from a country like Somalia, where there is basically no state to which they could return. They have fled the country because of fears of harm and have been granted refugee status by the New Zealand government. When they sought to apply for citizenship after having remained here for the requisite time, or not having stayed here for the requisite time, they were refused that on the basis that their situation was not compelling enough to justify the grant of citizenship.
Mr. Laurent says he expects Mr. Thiel was granted the exception under the other nature category, rather than for humanitarian reasons, and that could include his substantial financial investments in New Zealand.
The grounds for grant of citizenship in this provision are deliberately broad, and it could well be that financial contribution or some other kind of strategic contribution might also have been a significant enough factor and could be used as such.
He says he has no objection to someone getting granted citizenship if they're otherwise an upstanding person.
But I feel that if one is going to be generous on one side, perhaps there should be generosity to others whose situation may call out for a remedy, yet who don't have the money or the connections to sway those in power.
Mr. Thiel's investments here include $15 million he put into a partnership with the New Zealand Venture Investment Fund, which was finalised in December 2011, a few months after he gained citizenship, and announced in March the following year. A venture investment fund spokesman gave RNZ this written statement today.
NZVIF and Valar announced their partnership in March 2012. This was the result of discussions, negotiations and due diligence over quite a few months through 2011. We don't normally comment on the commercial negotiations we have with any of our investment partners, as these are subject to confidentiality agreements. But citizenship was not a factor and was never discussed.
The office of Stephen Joyce, who was the Economic Development Minister at the time of the agreement, said Mr. Thiel's investment was not contingent on his getting citizenship, and Mr. Joyce never discussed Mr. Thiel's citizenship application with the Internal Affairs Minister. The Department of Internal Affairs has so far not said why Mr. Thiel was granted the exception, saying it will consider releasing details under the Official Information Act. The current Minister of Internal Affairs, Peter Dunn, says he's not seen the case notes and knows very little about the matter. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Kate Newton tēnei.
Once again, Nathan Guy wouldn't talk to us today. Minister, if you're listening and you're available, we would love to have a bit of a chat. It's 25 minutes past 5. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. The surging housing market is taking its toll on household budgets, driving the cost of living to its fastest pace in more than 2 years. Official figures show consumer prices rose by 1.3% in 2016, led by a sharp hike in building costs and rents in Auckland. It's forcing some people to seek cheaper places to live, of course, and prompting unions to demand decent pay rises to keep up with it all. Our economics correspondent Patrick O'Mara reports.
Housing costs are on the rise. Tori Edsa and her boyfriend have been struggling to rent a flat in Auckland, quickly ruling out the central suburbs.
For a couple, bond was, 1,200 as I was just saying, and so we're trying to look maybe out west a bit more, but prices are just continuing to go up.
The latest inflation figures show rents rose 2% nationally, but more than 3% in Auckland. Construction costs for new houses jumped even more, up 6.5% nationally, its fastest pace in more than 11 years, while in Auckland building costs increased 8%. Miss Edsa says she's amazed at how much more expensive than other cities Auckland is.
I'm definitely going to move out of Auckland as soon as I can, but it's probably hard to save the money because I'm spending all my money on rent.
Fuel bills are also on the rise due to a rebound in crude oil prices. But the Petrol Watch spokesperson for the AA, Mark Stockdale, says the cost of filling up is higher than it should be, and he's blaming the fuel companies for padding their margins.
In the last fortnight, we've seen fuel prices rise 5 cents a litre, and none of that increase was due to commodity price or exchange rate movement.
The National Director of Unite Union, Mike Treen, says while headline inflation remains relatively muted at 1.3%, the reality is household budgets are under pressure. Mr Treen says his union and others will be pushing hard for fatter pay rises for their members.
Workers' actual living costs are escalating, and workers need wage rises that are able to compensate for that escalating cost of living, actually regardless of what the current CPI figure may be.
Economists do expect wages to go up due to skill shortages and a drop in unemployment, while firms are more confident about lifting their prices. The chief economist at ASB, Nick Tuffley, doesn't think rising inflation pressures will unduly worry the Reserve Bank just yet, saying a higher dollar and rising mortgage rates will keep prices in check.
I don't think enough to really spook the horses. The Reserve Bank's going to be pretty cautious. It's going to want to be certain that inflation is going to get comfortably a bit higher back within the target band. So we think the Reserve Bank will be quite content to wait.
Mr Tuffley is picking the central bank will leave its cash rate steady at 1.75% this year, though financial markets are predicting at least 1 and possibly 2 rate rises. For Checkpoint, Patrick O'Mara.
28 past 5, let's change the subject a little bit. The first autonomous electric shuttle vehicle in the country was launched amid much fanfare at Christchurch Airport today. The pre-programmed driverless vehicle will eventually transport passengers and their bags around the airport in Christchurch. But for the next 2 years, believe it or not, it will be test-driven on a private airport road. Here's Conan Young on the tarmac.
We're now witnessing the autonomous vehicle. Seats 15 passengers. And it doesn't have a driver. So you'll see, as I come up to the vehicle here, that there are passenger seats all the way around here, all the way around, but no space for a driver because it doesn't have one. So if I just come back again, you can have a look. It's quite a dinky little thing. It doesn't take petrol. It's an electric vehicle. The Navia, and there you have it. This is the future, apparently. This is going to be transporting passengers and baggage around the airport, but not for some time yet. So it's going to be tested for the next several years, they're saying, before they let it loose around the airport. But yeah, quite incredible. Wait till you see this thing moving. It's quite eerie, actually, just to see something moving without a driver on board. So yeah, there you go.
Colin, are you allowed to be a passenger? Are they going to let you on board?
No, unfortunately, John, not today. Media not allowed on the vehicle. However, the dignitaries were allowed to have a ride. So look, a host of dignitaries, including the Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, and the Minister of Transport, Simon Bridges, got to have a ride on the autonomous vehicle today and had a nice drive around the what is actually normally the landing strip for aircraft, but today is the testing venue for this new piece of technology. The Mayor, Leanne Dalzell, Councillor Vicky Buck, who's been a long-time proponent of these driverless vehicles, and the Minister of Transport, Simon Bridges, all got to have a go on the driverless vehicle today, and they spoke to us afterwards about what it was like.
I accidentally touched the Xbox control here, which is the emergency stop. That's why it stopped out there. Somebody was in the cone thing, so it stopped out there. You feel incredibly safe. It's really, really exciting. So, yeah, way cool. Yeah. Very exciting.
You know why it stopped back there? So it wasn't programmed to stop. It's programmed to stop here, but the reason it stopped just there was because the media had their cameras so close. So actually you got a real life demonstration of how safe it is in terms of judging whether there's something in front of it. So it was an unprogrammed stop. I think Vicky Buck has explained the previous unplanned stop, but that was because she touched something. The Xbox control. I mean, really.
So what did it feel like?
It was amazing, and I thought that the best part of the demonstration was going through the cones, because there you could see the effect of the pre-program going through and actually meeting every single target. So it was just brilliant.
Minister, how did you feel?
Yeah, look, I think it's an amazing experience. I think the precision, just the ability to, turn very tightly and do things on a pre-programmed basis. But then secondly, the way it quite clearly can react to the circumstances. So when one of the journalists was out a bit more than they should have been, it stopped on the, on the head of a dime. So it's very impressive technology, and you can sort of see why this is just going to grow and grow and be more and more part of our future.
Any nerves there from anybody?
None. Only when I learned Vicky was playing around with the control panel. Before that, I was rock solid. No, I mean, you feel very safe. And I mean, what's amazing, actually, even though there's no steering wheel and no one's sort of doing anything, how quickly you just get into a conversation, you forget that unlike every other journey you've ever done before, there's no one driving this thing. No one human anyway.
Well, there's no front and there's no back. That's the first thing that you notice, is that this is not a normal vehicle, but it is absolutely the way of the future. This is what's coming.
The way of the future. Leanne Dalzell on the way of the future. Before that, Simon Bridges, they were talking to Conan Young. Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Coming up, Nona with business news. Police speak about the vicious knife attack on a 72-year-old Auckland grandfather, an independent report into the Havelock North water poisoning, and much more before 6 o'clock. But first, with the 5:33 headlines at 5:33, Katrina Batten.
A review of Wellington's mental health services has found serious errors in the way the services run. The review was set up after 5 people being treated for mental illness were involved in homicides. The review panel says staff in one part of the system found it hard to get clear information about how a patient was being cared for in another part. They say information about a patient's treatment should be recorded in a single central file. The Prime Minister says citizenship can't be bought against Labour's allegations. An American billionaire was granted New Zealand citizenship after making $1 million donation to the Christchurch Earthquake Fund. Peter Thiel, who's a co-founder of PayPal, got New Zealand citizenship in 2011. Bill English says there have been many large donations to the Quake Fund from around the world. The Mexican president is under growing pressure to cancel a scheduled meeting with his US counterpart next week. Enrique Peña Nieto has condemned Donald Trump's order to build a wall along the US-Mexican border. He says Mexico does not believe in walls and will not be contributing any money. New Zealanders may find it more difficult to live in the US under Mr Trump's proposed tighter border rules. If the current visa interview waiver program is suspended, any New Zealander trying to obtain or renew either a visitor or work visa would need to be interviewed in person. Helen Clark is quitting as the head of the United Nations Development Programme. The former Prime Minister has held the job for 8 years after losing the 2008 election. At least 2 frontrunners, including former British Labour leader Ed Miliband, are jostling for the position. An independent report on the Havelock North water poisoning last August has found word was delayed in getting out to rest homes. The boil water notice was not issued until the end of the day E. coli was found in a water sample. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6.
Thanks, Katrina. We've got more on that independent report coming up. We've also got more on Wellington's mental health services and that review. But first, Nona with business. Hi, Nona.
Hello.
The government's books open,
That's
and
right.
what do they say? What do they show?
Well, they actually showed that the government books are in better condition than they thought. In fact, they were expecting a deficit of 1.7 billion for November, and the deficit was just 768 million, which is, better by half, better than half. So, what was that? That was because of a strong tax take and lower expenses. And we also did find out that the damage to the government's accounts from the Kaikoura earthquake was just under $700 million so far. And of course, they had set aside $1 billion in December. So looks like things are pretty good.
Okay. What else happened today?
Well, we had, of course, you heard earlier, of course, the inflation data. The New Zealand dollar has been holding steady, which is pretty good considering all of the movements around the world. The US dollar is...
Yeah, there has been, there's been volatility in Asia. The Australian's been having a bit of a tough time, but New Zealand has...
It's just steady as she goes. And so a little bit better today than yesterday at this time. So 72.8 US cents. That's, again, up against the Australian 96.2 US cents. And because someone asked me, I'm sticking back the British pence in there. 57.5 British pence as well. Our New Zealand top 50 index rose 0.3% today, and that's in line with what we're seeing through Asia. Things are a little bit better. That's 22 points to 7,113.
Interesting to see the Dow at those record levels, or whatever it's called now, the American market.
Well, that's right. Sorry, I should also mention, we had that earlier today, that the Dow closed above that 20,000 point mark, which is, exceptional. But it's because, a lot of investors are expecting Donald Trump to spend big, but that there's still a lot of uncertainty because of that protectionism. We're going to see Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Britain, arrive there soon.
Yeah, that's going to be a fascinating little visit.
Lots of excitement ahead.
Lots of excitement in America, not much in Mexico, and we'll talk about that later in the program. Thanks, Nona. We really appreciate it. Nona Peltier, our business reporter, who joins us every evening in the studio at that time. A review of Wellington's mental health services has found... we are going here now, aren't we? Yes, we are. A review... No, we're going to the bug first, aren't we? We're going to Havelock North. My papers were in order, but I just shuffled them for reasons that will remain unknown to all of us, including me. An independent report into the Havelock North water poisoning has found there was a delay in letting elderly rest homes know of the problem. I think that's rest homes for elderly people rather than the premises being elderly. And sections of the community felt they had been let down. In other words, people didn't know what was happening. More than 5,000 people, about 40% of the town's population, were infected from drinking water and the contamination in August of last year. The report, conducted by the country's former civil Defence Controller John Hamilton for the Hastings District Council, has been submitted as part of the government's investigation into the crisis. Kate Gudsell looks at this for us.
On the night of Thursday, August the 11th, the Hawke's Bay District Health Board noticed more people than normal were turning up at hospital with gastroenteritis. The next morning, a sample of Havelock North water tested positive for E. coli. The two were connected, and that day Hastings District Council chlorinated the water, but didn't issue a boil water notice until 6:30 that evening, 8.5 hours after the health authority was alerted. The report found the council's decision not to issue that boil water notice earlier hindered the message getting out to the community. The report's author, John Hamilton, says it was critical to warn people not to drink the water, and the decision not to declare a state of emergency aggravated the situation.
Had you declared a state of emergency for Havelock North because of the water problem, you might have got a bit more traction from the media and therefore deeper penetration of the boil water notice.
The report also found rest homes and elderly carers were not contacted until the Saturday morning, a day after a decision was made to do so. While the report says it's doubtful if that delay aggravated the situation, an elderly patient at the Mary Doyle Rest Home had actually died. Mr Hamilton says that person had been ill for a number of days before the authorities became aware there was a problem. The administrator of Havelock North Age Concern, Carol Winters, says her organisation helped up to 1,500 people over the course of the crisis.
Certainly the feeling of anger was around not being advised early enough. There were many people who were sick, of course, and just kept on hydrating and drinking the very thing that was making them sick. So, I mean, there's great irony there, isn't there?
Ms Winters says many of her clients didn't find out their water wasn't safe to drink until the Sunday. The report says other parts of the community, like local businesses, also felt let down by the council. Alexandra Tiley, the owner of Havelock North's Pippi Cafe, says she didn't find out about the problem until 8:30 on the Friday night, after customers had been drinking the water all evening. Mrs Tiley was alerted to the problem by someone eating at the restaurant who saw the news on their phone.
In our business, our main focus is making sure that we provide safe food for the customer, and so that was really hard to take, the fact that we had actually been serving people water that was contaminated all that time. It wasn't good enough.
Mrs Tiley says she was officially contacted the next day. An emergency operations centre wasn't activated until the Monday, and the report says it did not function smoothly at first due to a combination of confusion and experienced staff being away. However, by and large, the report does praise the council's response. Hastings District Council says the report identifies a number of areas for improvement, which it will build into its response planning. For Checkpoint, Kate Goodall.
We looked at Christchurch's mental health services earlier in the week. A review of Wellington's mental health services has found serious errors in the way the service is run. The review was set up after 5 people being treated for mental illness were involved in homicides. Our reporter Eric Frickberg has been reading the report and he joins us now live from Wellington. Hi Eric, what were these incidents?
Well, John, they were quite serious. In one case, a 67-year-old man was stabbed and he was killed by a person he had spent the day caring for. Now, this woman then went on a nighttime rampage through the streets, injured 4 other people, and was only stopped when she was seized and held down by police dogs. Now, she had been referred the previous evening to psychiatric assistance, but she was discharged. And then she went on to take part in this incident with a tragic result. Now, she was charged with murder, but she was acquitted by reasons of insanity. Now, there's another case, John. There was a mentally ill Kapiti man stabbed and wounded another man in a random attack at Waikanai railway station. Now, that man had killed his own brother 13 years earlier. He had been detained. He was found not guilty by reasons of insanity on that case. He was detained, but then he was released into the community in 2011. Now, he was also acquitted of the Waikanai attack on the grounds of insanity. Now, these, John, are 2 obviously very serious cases, but there are 3 others just like it.
And 2 acquittals on the grounds of insanity, Eric, as you say, and a special inquiry was commissioned off the back of this into how well this matter was handled by psych services at Capital and Coast District Health. What did it find?
Well, John, it found that it had findings for each of these particular incidents. In one of them, and it doesn't say which one, it says there was no evidence that a psychiatric assessment had been carried out at all on the person involved.
Gosh.
And in another case, again not identified, John, it says psychiatric intervention was minimal, quote unquote. But John, it's the overarching recommendations here that are perhaps the most significant ones.
And can you tell us what they are?
Well, it says there needs to be better record keeping. It said psychiatric staff in one part of the system sometimes found it hard to find out what other psychiatric staff in another part of the system had in fact recommended in the first place. It said it's absolutely essential that all information is held on a central file. And also, John, there needed to be a clear understanding of what the threshold is before there is psychiatric intervention. And it says this threshold has to be consistent right across the board. Now, it also says there needs to be better outpatient accommodation for mentally ill people, especially those with high-level needs who are in the community but still need some form of supervision. And most significantly, John, it urged that all patients should be assessed by a psychiatrist within 2 weeks of being admitted into the system.
Okay, they're fairly explicit recommendations, aren't they? What is the DHB doing about all of this?
Well, John, it says some of those issues are being worked on constantly. It refers to the record keeping about their patients in that context. Others, it says, such as accommodation, will be dealt with as planning talks on this particular issue. However, significantly, John, on the issue of seeing a psychiatrist within 2 weeks, the DHB says that's not necessary for all patients. It says those who are deemed to need to see a psychiatrist will, but not everyone. And that's where we stand at this stage.
Eric Frickberg, live from Wellington. Thank you, Eric Frickberg, talking about that report into Wellington's mental health services. It's coming up to 5:45. For most of us, well, summer holidays are over. Without much of a summer, really, in many parts of the country. But United Future leader Peter Dunn wants to change all that, launching a petition to find out what you think about moving the summer holidays later. He thinks we should shift the summer holidays till when the weather's better, settled, warmer, calmer, saner, more rational and more reliable. It's not a new idea. In fact, Peter Dunn's been banging on about it for years, but he thinks it's going to gain traction now.
What I've done today is launch an e-petition to basically assess the public mood on the subject and see whether we can take it further.
OK, and when you say take it further, if you had your way, what would you do?
What I'd like to see happen is us consider shifting the official holiday period probably to mid-February to mid-March. So what that would mean would be a shorter holiday period, Christmas, New Year, probably a week. People come back to work or school for about 6 weeks, and then we have the official holiday period beginning. Because that period, February to March, is when the weather is traditionally more settled. It's traditionally when people who haven't got ties take their holidays because they say it's the best time of the year to go. All I'm saying is let's give everyone that opportunity.
OK, what would that do to the school year, and particularly the kind of exams people are sitting in secondary school?
I don't think it would have a significant impact because the key to them is the number of days per year. So what you would do is start the school year probably after the March period, and that would run through until the February period the following year. So they could easily fit in their number of days. They might need to rejig term times and rejig the exam timetable around it.
When would they be sitting the exams? I mean,
well,
does
they
that
could
mean
probably still be doing them in the period they do now, maybe a couple of weeks later. But that's a detail that can be resolved. The important thing would be they would still get the same number of days per year. And as I say, the thought you get from teachers and kids about being stuck in hot, stuffy classrooms in February and March would go away.
OK. I mean, theoretically it sounds great, but actually practically there's a hell of a lot attached to this, isn't there? For example, business is built around the huge spend-up that takes place with the combination of summer vacations and Christmas. I guess you would say that revenue would be split. The school year is built around everything ending prior to Christmas with the exams in that kind of November window. And so isn't this a lot easier said than done?
Look, there are going to be issues. I think what you'd need to do is have a phase-in period. You couldn't have the schools moving this year and business moving next year, for example. It would all have to occur at the same time. But I don't think in terms of the Christmas spend, I don't think that would have a significant impact. People would still celebrate Christmas the way they do now. There might be a little later surge in terms of the pre-holiday period, but that would just simply be delaying what occurs now. As I say, with the schools, it's a matter of rejigging their timetable. I've been struck by the number of principals that I've seen online saying this is a great idea, let's go for it. So I don't think they see that as insurmountable problems. You'd need to make sure that government agencies align their programs, that the private sector in terms of general leave patterns aligned their environments as well, so that everyone was on the same page. But with a good lead-in time and proper discussion, none of those problems are insurmountable.
So we have holidays February, March. Then, of course, there's Easter in April. The country will be in a coma for about 2 months.
Well, Easter sort of varies depending on the year. Sometimes Easter might actually just fit right on the end of that period. Other times it might be a bit later. But again, look, this is an adjustment problem. I don't think any of these things are sort of insurmountable obstacles to making a change if that's what the public will is. And I think the important thing now is to test it and to see if there's strong support for it. We had similar sorts of arguments, for instance, when daylight saving was first proposed. Now we have daylight saving for 6 months of the year and no one bats an eyelid. So, again, it's an adjustment issue.
Peter Dunn, he says he wants to test it. What do you think? Text us 2101. Would you like to move the holidays later? It's coming up to 11 to 6. On Monday evening, Checkpoint revealed the number of nights youth offenders, including young people only accused of a crime, had spent in police cells had risen sharply. In fact, they'd tripled. 151 nights in police custody in the years 2015-16, up from 51 the previous year. Young people aged between 14 and 16 can be remanded in police custody if Child, Youth and Family cannot provide a bed for them at a youth justice residence. It's meant to be a last resort. The figures suggest it's happening 2 or 3 times a week. We heard from the Children's Commissioner, Judge Andrew Beecroft, who said it was time for this practice to be abolished once and for all. Principal Youth Court Judge John Walker told us the number of teenage offenders forced to spend nights in police cells is unacceptable. But we didn't hear from a young offender. Well, Josephine was 15. She had had a tough childhood, and due to experiences on the street, she was far more familiar with violence and difficult places than most people her age. How long was she held in police cells for?
3 nights and 4 days.
And where were you? What cells were you in?
Henderson.
And what was that experience like?
It was terrible.
Can you describe why it was terrible?
Because I didn't like have my own privacy. Like when I had a shower, before I went up before the judge, that was the only time I could have a shower. I couldn't have a shower any other time, or like have phone calls or anything. I was just there by myself.
And were there other people near you? Could you hear, for example, adults being held around you? Did you interact with them? Were they able to talk to you? What was your exposure to adults who had been charged with crimes like?
Well, they were pretty violent because when the police made a mistake and they put an adult with juvie in the day room, and she ended up assaulting my co-offender. And then, yeah, I don't know what happened after that, but yeah. So that wasn't really good.
So you were put in a day room with an adult charged with a crime?
Yeah, and I was a juvie.
You were 15?
Yeah, not allowed adults with kids.
And this adult assaulted?
My co-offender.
And what happened then?
She was removed and charged with assault, but yeah.
So she was formally charged with assault against your co-offender. How old was she?
She was my age,
15.
Yep.
And were you scared in there? I don't want to put words in your mouth. If you weren't scared, it's okay to say that.
I wasn't scared, but if I was anyone else, they probably would have been.
Josephine, who was inside, by the way, for numerous driving offences, including reckless driving and failing to stop. But what she's talking about there is the point Andrew Beecroft and John Walker have made, and that's that children who end up in police cells have either already been the victims of mistreatment and don't need any further exposure to it, or are being thrown into an adult world they're simply not equipped to cope with. As an aside, Josephine's experience was 3 years ago. How is she going now, aged 18?
I snapped out of, like, that stuff.
Have you?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
What made you snap out of it?
I just stopped hanging out with the wrong people.
Well, that's a good choice.
Yeah.
Was that easy to do or hard to do?
Nah, it was hard to do.
Yeah, the wrong people.
That's, like, all I knew.
Yeah, and also the wrong people often don't want to let you go, right?
Yeah.
That was Josephine, who told me the worst thing about being in the police cells and her previous life was the terrible sense of loneliness. It's coming up to 7 minutes to 6. The government has chosen 6 spots in the Marlborough Sounds to shift salmon farms to in an effort to cut down seabed pollution. King Salmon, which runs all the farms, says shifting them from places with low flow to spots with stronger currents would be a win all round. It could more than triple production and create 300 jobs, as well as being cleaner. 5 of the 6 proposed sites are in Pelora Sound. One is in Tory Channel. Public consultation opens today and runs until late March, so a couple of months. Environmentalists are expected to express fears about ongoing pressure from commercial operations in a holiday hotspot. However, King Salmon Chief Executive Grant Rosewarne says leaving the old farms where they are does not make sense. It would cost at least $40 million to shift the farms, but could almost double their workforce from the 440 now employed.
Unfortunately, 6 of those farms, and a farm's roughly a surface hectare, were awarded 30 years ago when we didn't know the conditions required for our species. You just can't grow many salmon there. You have a high impact on the seafloor. and we'd rather not be doing that. So you can get an okay result, but you can't get a world's best practice result out of those sites. So if it's possible to relocate them to the conditions that we now know are ideal for the species, we can get a stunningly good outcome for everybody concerned, including the environment. We were recently awarded 3 newer farms, which really have pretty much ideal conditions, and we are getting a great result out of those. But we have these 6 legacy farms from 30 years ago, which are not ideal. In the past, we didn't have the technology to be able to moor a farm in a fast-flowing site, even though that is ideal for the fish. So now we do have that technology, but the consents and the space hasn't caught up with that new technology.
If these shifts, the relocations go ahead, what will that cost to do that?
It will certainly cost money because, first of all, the infrastructure that we have on low-flow sites won't float on high-flow sites, so we'll have to write all that off. So that'll be, $1 or $2 million to do that. And then we have to buy new infrastructure that can stand a high-flow site. And I mentioned about the new technology in mooring to enable that. And so they tend to cost about $6 million each, so it certainly won't be cheap. But if MPI are up for leading this, we're up for following. We would much rather shift them because we get a better environmental outcome, we get a better economic outcome and a better social outcome. So it really is a win-win for the entire community.
It's Grant Rosewarne of King Salmon Farms talking to our reporter Phil Pennington. Jamaican sprinter Usain Bolt will be forced to return one of his 9 gold medals after the International Olympic Committee revealed one of his teammates in the men's 4x100 metre relay at the 2008 Beijing Games tested positive for a controlled substance. This report from Reuters.
This is Usain Bolt, the world's fastest man, and this guy with him just cost Bolt an Olympic gold medal. The International Olympic Committee announcing Wednesday that Bolt's relay teammate Nesta Carter tested positive for a banned substance from 2008. The 4-person team that won gold in the men's 4x100 relay at the Beijing Games stripped of their prize. The IOC announcing Carter is just one of 31 athletes failing blood and urine tests from 2008. No word yet from Bolt on the verdict. He's reportedly said in the past he would accept whatever decision made by the IOC. If the Jamaican track star is at all sad about the loss, he can see comfort in his remaining 8 gold medals.
Yeah, 8 gold medals is still pretty good, isn't it? Lots of talk in the office today about Mary Tyler Moore. Those of us of a particular vintage were, well, remembering that program with great affection. The youngsters had no idea what we were talking about, but don't worry. Tributes are flooding in for the American actress Mary Tyler Moore. She died aged 80. The Emmy Award-winning actress first appeared as an unconventional wife on the Dick Van Dyke Show, but then she went on to play a single career woman, which was, reasonably modern at the time, in her own hit program, The Mary Tyler Moore Show in the 70s. Here's the BBC's Peter Bowes with a look back on her life.
How will you make it on your own?
A darling of American television, Mary Tyler Moore captivated audiences for more than half a century. She started acting at the age of 17. Within a year, she was married and pregnant. 6 years later and divorced, she got her first big break playing Laura Petrie, a wholesome, independent-minded wife on the Dick Van Dyke Show.
It was the best fun. You just couldn't wait to get to work in the morning, and you sort of hated to go home in the afternoon.
In 1962, Moore married the TV executive Grant Tinker, and they formed MTM Enterprises. Its first TV series was The Mary Tyler Moore Show. Set in Minneapolis at a time when the women's liberation movement was growing, the sitcom was one of America's first primetime programs to feature a single working woman.
Oh, well, that's just wonderful.
In 1980, Moore showed that her acting abilities extended beyond comedy.
Buck never would have been in the hospital.
That's enough.
She played an icy, grieving mother in the film Ordinary People. It earned her a Golden Globe Award, and she was nominated for an Oscar. Mary Tyler Moore had personal struggles. She battled alcoholism and diabetes and devoted much of her time to raising awareness.
I have struggled with my disease and confronted its tyranny every day of my life.
In 1983, Moore remarried and continued acting in films, on stage and television. She received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Screen Actors Guild. But she'll always be remembered for that smile, sense of humour and independent spirit.
You might just make it after all.
It was a great theme tune. That was Peter Bowes from the BBC. Fellow actors such as Ed Asner, who played Lou Grant, her boss, have paid tribute to her. Now, lots of feedback. Peter Dunn suggesting moving the holidays till later. It's really mixed. Don't change the holidays. It's hard enough trying to find accommodation campsites, etc. in February, already due to all foreign tourists without all of New Zealand's domestic tourists as well. Yes, says Sally, to shifting summer holidays. I'm a teacher, and every February, March, we swelter in our classrooms. Thanks for your comments about our program, Sally, too. Great. Move the holidays. The French have a few days off at Christmas, then 2 months in summer. It's a bit daft, that's because it's winter in France, right? It's a bit daft. Imagine 6 weeks back at school, straight after exams, hard yards, and how much would you learn in those 6 weeks? Nation in a 3-month coma, I agree, said Kate. Big yes for moving all term dates along 4 or 5 weeks. Better summer and better snow. Good God, says a person called John. There must be an election in the offing. Dunn has called out from under his rock. So really mixed feedback, about 50-50 on the moving it or not, with one little cynical dig at the end of it. Thank you all. It's lovely to hear from you, and it's time for the pips.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi o te pō. Good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Inflation has risen at its fastest rate in a couple of years, and a major union is calling for decent pay rises. The Consumer Price Index rose by 1.3 for the year to December. The cost of building new houses jumped by 6.5% and rents were up by 2%. Households in Auckland experienced even sharper increases, with building costs up by 8% and rents by 3%. The National Director of the Unite Union, Mike Treen, says while headline inflation remains relatively modest, household budgets are under pressure.
Housing costs are escalating, power costs are escalating, much higher than any CPI figures. And the fact that we can buy an iPhone cheaper this year than last year doesn't compensate for that reality.
Mike Treen of Unite. A review of Wellington's mental health services has found serious errors in the way the services run. The review was set up after 5 people being treated for mental illness were involved in homicides. The review panel, headed by Auckland University psychiatry professor Graham Millsop, says staff in one part of the system found it hard to get clear information about how a patient was being cared for in another part. Their report says information about a patient's treatment should be recorded in a single central file. They also say there should be better outpatient accommodation for mentally ill people, especially those with complex and high-level needs. All new patients should also be assessed by a psychiatrist within 2 weeks of their admission. The Automobile Association says it responds to at least 1 or 2 emergency calls every day to free children from locked cars. New figures from the AA reveal 800 children were locked in cars last year, as were nearly 700 animals. Its national manager, John Healy, says staff have been called to more than 150 emergency jobs involving children or pets locked inside vehicles since December alone. He says in such cases 2 patrols are sent out, one to manage the people outside the car and the other to get inside. Mr Healy says if it's a hot day and the child or pet has been locked in for a while, side windows will be broken to get them out. He says whether it's accidental or not, it's a dangerous habit leaving children or pets that way. Kaikoura's promotional agency says it's rethinking how the town markets itself to tourists. The general manager of Destination Kaikoura, Glenn Ormsby, says things have changed since the earthquake 2 months ago and tourist operators need to look at new ways of doing business. He says ideas being looked at include the promotion of the Alpine Pacific Triangle Drive route, which covers Christchurch, Hamner, Waipara and Kaikoura. Mr Ormsby says operators need to consider marketing Kaikoura more as a destination in its own right. The country's leading salmon producer says shifting 6 farms to places in the Marlborough Sounds with strong currents will be a win for everyone. The government has opened public consultation on moving the farms to 5 sites in Pelora Sound and 1 site in Tory Channel. King Salmon's Chief Executive Grant Rosewarne says the shift could more than triple production from the same surface area and create 300 jobs, as well as reduce fish waste on the seabed.
There's not another initiative out there where you can get a better environmental outcome, employ 300 additional people and get a better social outcome as well in terms of being further away from recreation and batches.
Grant Rosewarne. However, the Guardians of the Sounds group says the shift would let more salmon be farmed and so create more pollution. Christchurch Airport has been showing off its new driverless car, the first of its kind in the country. Developed by a New Zealand company, HMI Technologies, it'll be trialled over several years before a decision is made on whether to bring it into regular service at the airport. The 15-seat shuttle would be used to ferry passengers and baggage around. The project has the backing of the Christchurch City Council and the Transport Agency, which are considering whether autonomous vehicles could be used in other areas. A young man in China who set off on an epic bike journey home for the Chinese New Year spent 30 days going the wrong way. The migrant worker, who couldn't afford a train ticket, was more or less illiterate and couldn't read maps, so relied on passers-by for directions. He set off from Rizhao, north of Shanghai, aiming for his home in Heilongjiang province, 1,700 kilometres to the north, but was stopped by the traffic police in the central province of Anhui, 500 kilometres off course. The police paid for his train ticket home. It's 6:05. In sport, 13th seed Venus Williams and fellow American Coco Vandeweghe have gone to a deciding third set in their women's semi-final at the Australian Tennis Open. The winner will play either Serena Williams or Mirjana Lucic-Baroni in the final. And it'll be an all-Swiss battle at Melbourne Park tonight as 4th seed Stan Wawrinka takes on Roger Federer in the men's semi-finals. Wawrinka won the first of his 3 Grand Slam titles in Melbourne in 2014. He's been impressed by Federer at this tournament, given that the 4-time champion missed much of 2016 through injury.
It's going to be a great match for sure. He's playing so well since the beginning of the tournament. He had a little bit some hesitation in the 2 first rounds, but since that, he's really flying on the court. So it's great to see him back at that level. Hopefully, I can manage to play a great match.
Stan Wawrinka. The Hawke's Bay United football coach Brett Angel and midfielder Corey Chettelberg have both been banned for 4 games for abusive language towards an official in their premiership game against Team Wellington last weekend. Off-spinner Lee Kasperek is back in the New Zealand women's cricket team for the home and away limited over series against Australia after missing the South Africa and Pakistan series with a broken finger. And the National Rugby League is going to impose a mobile phone ban in dressing rooms to combat concerns over potential player contact with gamblers and betting agencies. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Trump Town wanderings of Chris Zanardi through the down-and-out settlements of the disunited states of America. Chris likes to go wherever he's told it's not safe to venture, talk to the locals and photograph them. And this week's Cultural Ambassador Chris Janidis talks about the use of equipment in modern dance, or how one person's crutch is another's stroke of genius, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, from after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Manawatu, including Bay of Plenty in the central high country. Mainly fine, but areas of morning and evening cloud and patchy drizzle south of Waikato tomorrow evening. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa fine. Horowhenua, Kapiti and Wellington fine today, mostly cloudy tomorrow. Nelson and Marlborough mainly fine, but rain about the ranges for a time tomorrow. Canterbury mainly fine, but isolated showers south of Christchurch. Bulla and Westland periods of rain easing to a few showers tomorrow afternoon and fine spells increasing. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, rain or showers at times with possible thunderstorms about coastal areas clearing tomorrow evening. The Chatham Islands mainly fine today, a few light showers tomorrow. It's 6:05 on RNZ National. More news. I don't have to say that, do I?
Well, you do.
Because we're listening to Checkpoint and more news at 7.
Yep, we look forward to it. Thanks, Katrina Batten. Let's go back to where we started an hour ago. Donald Trump, these executive orders, the wall, immigration crackdown, all kinds of stuff. Our correspondent Nina Marie Potts begins our coverage this half hour.
A nation without borders is not a nation. Beginning today, the United States of America gets back control of its borders, gets back its borders.
US President Donald Trump has wasted no time this week in delivering on his campaign pledges, saying the building of a new border wall with Mexico would begin within months.
The Secretary of Homeland Security, working with myself and my staff, will begin immediate construction of a border wall.
Speaking at the Department of Homeland Security, the president announced plans for new restrictions on refugees and immigrants from Muslim-majority countries. The plan, according to White House officials, includes more detention centres and federal border control agents. And his administration will strip federal funding from so-called sanctuary cities, which generally shield illegal immigrants from law enforcement looking to deport federal offenders.
The day is over when they can stay in our country and wreak havoc. We are going to get them out, and we're going to get them out fast.
News of the executive orders has human rights and immigrant groups up in arms. Nihad Awad is executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations, the country's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy group.
We are a nation of immigrants. That's very, very important. We cannot deny who we are as a nation. I believe it has nothing with national security. It has to do a lot with prejudice and with campaign slogans that are becoming now policies.
But President Trump insists he's driven by national security interests and that he's even open to bringing back torture.
Would I feel strongly about waterboarding? As far as I'm concerned, we have to fight fire with fire. Now, with that being said, I'm going with General Mattis, but I have spoken as recently as 24 hours ago with people at the highest level of intelligence, and I asked them the question, does it work? Does torture work? And the answer was yes.
The move has some top Republicans challenging the power of the president, such as Senator John McCain, who insists even if the president were to sign an executive order, the law is a law, and the US is not bringing back torture. Some suggest President Trump's announcements are nothing more than smoke and mirrors, pointing to legislative and congressional hurdles along the way. Trump administration insiders are briefing there's more to come, such as executive orders that would dramatically reduce America's role in the United Nations. Still worth remembering that the number of executive orders this president is signing is not unprecedented. He's keeping pace with his predecessor. For Checkpoint, I'm Nina Maria Potts in Washington.
Rafael Romo is Senior Latin American Affairs Editor of CNN Worldwide. He's currently in the Dominican Republic attending a summit of Latin American leaders. It's worth remembering that many Mexican and Central American families are financially supported by money sent home from family members in the US. Add to this the fact that President Trump will pay for the wall out of money the US would have spent elsewhere in Mexico. And the financial impact of the wall and associated immigration moves could be catastrophic for the country. In fact, Rafael Romo says the impact has already started.
Well, it started even before the announcement today. There was a sort of threat on Twitter, as Mr. Trump often does, saying that he would tax companies, specifically car companies that were making cars elsewhere and selling them in the United States. And so Ford had a humongous project in north central Mexico, I believe in the state of Durango. And that project that was seen by locals as a great hope that would give jobs to thousands of people, Ford decided to stop it and instead take those jobs back to the United States. And so this was even before today, before the announcement. So the effects of the Trump presidency are already being felt. The other effect, John, and this probably affects more than anything the average Mexican, the average consumer. The rhetoric used during the campaign greatly affected the Mexican currency, the peso. And this is because as companies started to hear what Trump had in mind for Mexico in terms of businesses and business opportunities and taxing companies that did businesses in Mexico or took jobs to Mexico, they decided that it was not a safe bet to invest in Mexico. And so the peso, for this reason and others, it's not the only one, I got to be fair on that, decided to take their money elsewhere, and so the peso has lost a significant amount. The value of the peso has gone down significantly over the last year or so, and this has had a really bad negative effect on consumers in general, and also inflation has taken root as well. So a very, very complicated situation in Mexico as a result of this.
The perverse and cruel irony of all of this is that what history suggests is that illegal immigration north from Mexico into the US increases during times of economic hardship. People are forced into desperate measures. So the irony is that Trump may be creating precisely the conditions that fuel illegal immigration.
Yes, that's exactly right, and it's a very good point, John, because for the longest time, the running joke in Mexico has been, you give me a 20-foot wall and I'll give you a 21-foot ladder, meaning that as long as there's a demand for cheap labor in the United States, there will always be a Mexican worker who's not making enough at home to support a family, and they're going to find a way to get to the United States. And the other reality that we also have to consider is that a lot of these migrants do not really cross the border illegally. They get a tourist visa, and they fly into the United States, and they just overstay their visas. And the same is true for not only Mexicans but other Central Americans. So the wall is symbolic. It plays very well with the Trump constituency in the United States, but I'm not sure that it's going to address the root of the problem, the economic realities that Mexican workers have to face. And what you just mentioned, it's just the law of supply and demand. And if the equation doesn't change, the pull is still going to be there for Mexican workers to leave everything behind in Mexico and migrate to the United States.
That's CNN's Latin American editor, Rafael Rommel, talking to us earlier. Back in New Zealand, the police won't reveal what was said to a 72-year-old man before he was attacked with a knife in front of his young grandchildren at a park in the Auckland suburb of Remuera. They say the man had been playing with his grandchildren at Little Rangitoto Reserve about 4:30 yesterday afternoon when the unprovoked attack happened. Our reporter Carla Penman went to the reserve.
It's a beautiful sunny afternoon at Little Rangitoto Reserve with laughing children playing on the swings and slides. Several mothers gasped and instinctively checked on their children when told what had taken place yesterday near where they stood. I spoke to a mother of 3 who had been at the park just 2 hours prior. She said she had always thought it was safe, but was now having second thoughts about coming back. Speaking just metres away from where a 72-year-old man was attacked while picnicking with his grandchildren, Detective Senior Sergeant Paul Newman told media an altercation had taken place beforehand.
The young male has engaged the victim in some conversation. I don't want to go into that at this stage, and has tried to draw him away from the park. The male has turned and walked away, and that's when the attacks happened. There's been no argument, there's been no provocation. It was completely unprovoked and a very violent attack.
He says the accused, whom they believe to be a man in his early 20s dressed in dark clothing, fled on foot and was last seen running down Upland Road towards Benson Road.
The victim and his family are shaken, as you can expect, but he's doing all right. The injury was thankfully minor and he didn't require any medical assistance afterwards.
Mr. Newman says at least 20 people, including young children, were at the park at the time. Witnesses in the area who may have seen anything are being urged to contact the police. In Auckland for Checkpoint, ko Carla Penman tēnei.
Engineers may have to be brought in from outside Wellington to complete government-ordered strengthening work on building facades in the inner city and the Hutt Valley. The directive from central government will affect about 300 buildings and is aimed at minimising the risk of injury or death from falling masonry in the event of another strong earthquake in or around the capital. Paloma Magoni reports.
These shoppers on Wellington's Cuba Street were pleased to learn that well-known and loved buildings will be strengthened.
If they don't, they won't be allowed to stay open. And Cuba Street is a central part of Wellington's colour. And I'd be sorry to see a lot of the smaller ones go. I really would. Yeah.
I was walking down the street with my 2 young children, knowing that the facades were stronger and protect us from earthquake. That would definitely make me feel safer.
The work will have to be completed within a year and is expected to cost $20,000 to $30,000 per building, half of which will be met by the Wellington City Council and the government. Wellington's Mayor Justin Lester says the decision is sensible with the public safety at its core.
If you've got people walking up and down the street and we have a large-scale earthquake, you want to make sure that pieces of a building aren't going to fall on top of you. And this is an immediate step we can take. This is public safety risk number one, really.
The president of the Society for Earthquake Engineering, Peter Smith, welcomes the move, which he says shows lessons have been learned from the 2011 earthquake in Christchurch.
The technical societies did approach government for an initiative on securing facades because of the lessons learned from Christchurch and the tragic loss of life that occurred in the February earthquake when these unsecured facades collapsed onto the street.
But Peter Smith says outside expertise may be needed because a 12-month time frame to get the work done is tight.
We need to recognise this is a public safety initiative and that it should probably take some priority over other works. If we don't move reasonably rapidly, then the risk reduces and it's no real point in undertaking the work. So I think the government struck a reasonable balance on the time frame.
He says one of the side effects of the work is hopefully the preservation of buildings and precincts, which are highly valued by people. For Checkpoint, this is Paloma Migoni.
We're going to stay in Wellington with the Rugby Sevens. We're going to look at some sport now. It used to be the biggest party in town. In fact, it was an event that attracted visitors from far and wide. This year, not quite half the tickets have sold yet. But tournament director Steve Dunbar is still upbeat about the event, which is this weekend. I caught up with him earlier, just as the Fijian players were passing by.
Oh, I'm just sitting in the foyer at the team hotel, and the Fijians have just walked outside, and I was just only a producer. I went to Fiji during the year and I had to keep my shirt on. These guys are mighty fine athletes.
Yeah, they're magnificent looking men, aren't they? They're also the Olympic champs too, aren't they?
Yeah, they did very well over in Rio, and looking forward to them playing well this weekend too. A lot of Fijian fans down here in Wellington.
Yeah, there's a wonderful story about the Fijian team. There's a wonderful story around them, and that's the kind of thing that sells tickets. But have you sold tickets?
Oh, look, John, we've never shied away from the fact that it's been more difficult the last couple of years, but we're expecting 15,000 people on each of the 2 days this weekend, and if we do get those numbers, that'll be an increase on 2016, and that'll be a good thing.
So 15,000 on each of the 2 days, a total of 30,000 tickets sold?
That's right, that's what we're expecting, John, yeah. Yep.
Okay, and so how many, so that's not quite half full, is it? It's not embarrassing, but it's not as many as you would have hoped for, I suspect.
No, the more the merrier, John. Ticket revenue is very important for us, but our commercial program is pretty strong at the moment. The weather forecast for Wellington's looking mighty fine this weekend, so hopefully we can kick-start summer. It's been a little bit slow here.
It's been a little bit slow everywhere, other than the north, as they keep pointing out. Steve, does the event suffer from an identity crisis? So, to put it politely, it was a booze fest, wasn't it? But a lot of people turned up. And then when it stopped being a booze fest, people stopped coming.
Yeah, there's no doubting that after the 2014 tournament, that's the one we didn't sell out for the first time. We went on public sale in 2015 and the party goers just didn't buy the tickets that they had done in the past. So we had two choices. We could do nothing and hope it came right, or we could do some homework and try and make some changes. We've looked at tournaments like the Big Bash, which 5 or 6 years ago you couldn't buy an ice cream there, and they've turned that event around so you can go and take your family, who can go and dress up and dance and have a few drinks.
So the Big Bash, forgive me, sorry to interrupt, but I suspect some of our listeners won't know what the Big Bash is. That's the 2020 cricket competition in Australia, right?
Yeah, that's right, and I think that's one of the biggest success stories in the Southern Hemisphere in a sporting sense.
So what did you learn from them? You learnt that...
We learnt that we needed to turn the Wellington Sevens into a tournament that anybody could go to and that they could create their own Sevens experience while they were there.
Martin Snedden is saying he feels like this event has reached the end of its natural life, that everything in the sports business and in fact most businesses has a finite life cycle, and this is it. Do you think that's unfair? Do you think you'll be back next year?
Look, I do. I've worked for Martin for 3 years on Rugby World Cup, and he has some strong views on things. As I say, we've done our homework. We've looked at other tournaments that have been in the same position as us, who have turned things around. So we're confident that trying to create a party for all is the way forward. Wellington's got a contract for 3 more tournaments. So, the proof will be in the pudding.
That is Steve Dunbar talking about the Wellington Sevens, which is on this weekend. We're going to end tonight with a bit of a squabble over the quality of accommodation. that an Auckland woman had. She's taken to social media to try and get a Rotorua hotel shut down, saying it was mouldy, dirty and run down to a point of being a health risk. Vicky May and her husband took their 3 children to the Silver Oaks Resort Heritage for their 10th wedding anniversary last weekend. She said they saved up the $151.20 per night for the much-needed break after their house burned down a year ago. But Vicky says when they got there, they were greeted with, quote, hotel hell and not, quote, the relaxing, re-energising stay that was promised.
There were stains on the walls, there was mould everywhere, there was vanities were broken because they were rotten, kitchen benches were swelling, mould in the fridge, holes in the walls, food objects all over the curtains, ripped blankets on the beds, 3 towels for a family of 5, cockroaches running up my son's leg.
And what did you do when you got into this room and saw this?
The first room, after we found what looked like snot smeared on the wall and food on the duvet, we went down and complained, and I also asked to move because one of my children are highly allergic to mould, and the room just absolutely smelt. So they put us in a better, well, what they say was a better room, with just a bit less mould, smelling a lot better. But that was the room that the locks were broken on the doors. They were locked with deadbolts because there wasn't even a handle on the ranch slider, holes in the wall, no knobs on the bathroom doors or wardrobe doors, mould in the fridge, swelling kitchen bench, PowerPoints that you could pull out with your hand, which I think it was half the reason maybe why the jug literally exploded and launched up in the air, hitting the ceiling of the hotel roof. After we complained several times, the jug was the last of the issues when we went over and asked for a refund, which he said he couldn't do, gave us an email address, so we emailed them straight away before we left, and then we departed and made our way back to Auckland before literally someone got hurt.
And you've since been essentially called a liar by the hotel. What do you say to that?
I'm absolutely horrified. But they reckon there was no emails, there was no complaints, and I gave them till Tuesday afternoon when they rang me and then told me that they did not see it was necessary for a refund. And we thought, we saved really hard to go away, and that's what happened. So basically, I'm not going to get my money back. Our weekend was ruined.
So that was Vicky May. The Rotorua Silver Oaks, where Vicky and her family stayed, has more than 100 one-star reviews across several review websites. But one of the owners of the Rotorua Silver Oaks Resort, Greg Wilson, told our reporter Zach Fleming a short time ago his hotel is clean. He says Vicky is not telling the truth.
In the reality is the guest checked into a room 28, and basically they stayed there the first night. At 9:30 at night, they came to reception and said they had a family crisis and had to leave and go back to Auckland. And so they checked out, and the only thing they said to us was that the jug had blown up. When we looked at the jug, there was no water around. We suspect they didn't put any water in the jug. She didn't raise any concerns at the hotel. She's taken pictures of a tennis court that is next door. That was originally part of the hotel. But if you look on Booking.com and Expedia, we don't advertise we have a tennis court anymore.
I just find it interesting that you mentioned Booking.com and Expedia and whatnot.
Yeah.
Just going on those websites, there are quite a few reviews of the hotel that are very negative, one-star reviews. If I can read you just one here, it says that the place was disgracefully filthy, there was dirty surfaces, the couch was filthy, the management were hopeless and rude.
I think basically is that the rooms are clean. The pool is always clean. We have it cleaned every week by a Bay of Plenty pool. The rooms are very clean. We absolutely very clean. And we are currently in a refurbishment process of refurbishing the rooms. We have builders here refurbishing the rooms right now. And the rooms are categorically very clean. So I know they're clean. I have been through all the rooms and I know they're clean.
So what do you make of all these negative reviews then of people saying that they're not clean?
I think if any customer raises an issue, we're happy to resolve that issue to ensure that that is resolved, and we always will do that. I think basically is that, and if something is wrong, then we will certainly make every step to rectify the problem to ensure they have an enjoyable stay.
That's Greg Wilson, owner of the Rotorua Silver Oaks Resort. He offered Vicky 2 free nights if she wants to go back. Lots of feedback on Peter Dunn tonight. I'm taking my piece out. Lots of feedback on Peter Dunn suggesting that the summer holidays are pushed back later. As a teacher, I think we should begin summer break. I think we begin summer break too soon. Sorry, it's practically impossible to teach 30 kids in Feb in a stifling room with no aircon. Actually, surprisingly large amount of support from teachers. We thought that it would make the old exams a bit of a shambles, particularly if you put Christmas before the exams and kids have to study over Christmas. Yes, move the summer holidays. We lived in the UK for 5 years. It was great to split Christmas and summer holidays. More things to look forward to, and it spreads out the cost. Peter Dunn needs to put his time into real problems, this person said. It's something that everyone has had to put up with for years. Unsettled weather through that period. Suck it up and move on. Let's get rid of the public holidays, Christmas and Easter, tied to religious events, and give people 5 weeks leave instead. Let people choose when to take their holidays. Don't make them take anachronistic stat days. And Monty says Minister Peter Dunn is mad. We're sure that's not the case, Monty. Northland summer runs from December through to mid-February. That's the reason most Jaffas travel north for their summer in Northland. Must be an election year. Monty, it is. Thank you for all your feedback. It's lovely to hear from you. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Unite Union is calling for decent pay rises to meet increased living costs, with inflation rising at its fastest rate in 2 years. A review of Wellington's mental health services wants a central file of patient data and better outpatient accommodation after finding serious errors in the way the services run. A government move to shift salmon farms gets a big thumbs up from a leading producer. And the AA says nearly 800 children and 700 pets are locked in cars every year. Our next news and weather is at 7.
As well as coming out your wireless, Nights with Brian Crump is available online around the world, everywhere from Lagos to Los Angeles.
That's the bass Crump, Crump moves and the companies that come. Like I say, it's a freestyle, and that means you can come up with moves, you can be creative, you can find the power